guys, Tyler with Meeple Mountain here with another board game review. Today brought to you by our friends at Elf Creek Games, who have given us a copy of Atlantis Rising 2nd Edition. We're really excited to jump in and play this 1 to 7 co-op game where you're working as a team to save the city of Atlantis. It's a really fun worker placement, kind of resource collection, collaborative game where you're working together to build the various components that are going to go onto this portal generator and hopefully save you and your people from the ocean's rising tide. So let's go ahead and jump in and learn how to play. Atlantis Rising is, ironically, a game about Atlantis sinking. The time for the island of Atlantis has come, and the gods are angry and throwing their rage against the Atlanteans by causing the ocean to rise and slowly sink all of the peninsulas of the island of Atlantis. And eventually, the entire board will be covered by water. And ultimately, the middle tile there in the city of Atlantis itself will be submerged, and you and your people will be lost. But all hope is not yet lost. There is one chance that you and your friends have discovered, other leaders of Atlantis. There is, in the ancient texts, a blueprint. And that blueprint creates a dimensional gate, a portal, that will lead you and your people to somewhere safe, to safety, to another place, another time where you can live in peace and harmony. To do this, you're going to need to build the 9 components that are blueprints laid out here on this circular board. You'll need to spend the various resources needed to craft those components. Then finally, you'll need to build the power core. And if you're able to do so, you will complete the dimensional portal and you will be safe and you'll save your people from the calamity that the gods are bringing against them. But time is short, and if you fail to build the portal before all of the island and the city of Atlantis sinks, you will lose and be lost to history in the process. As I mentioned before, Atlantis Rising is a cooperative game where you and up to 6 of your friends, which is crazy, up to 6 of your friends will work together as a team to save your people from utter calamity. You're going to be traveling around this very beautifully illustrated, these peninsulas for the island of Atlantis, collecting resources in the form of ore and crystal and gold and Atlantium and mythic energy, all in the name of crafting these blueprints that are going to give you some temporary bonuses and aid, but so that you can craft all 9 of them to build the power core and open the dimensional portal to save your people before the oceans sink you beneath their angry waves. That is the general gist of Atlantis Rising. It is a worker placement game that is collaborative in nature, where you will be each collecting individual resources, but having to pool them strategically and work together to craft the various components that you need to win the game. In the game setup, we have an example setup here for 4 players, and everybody starts the game with their leader Meeple, which has usually some form of an asymmetric ability associated with it, 2 of their follower Meeples that they have available at the start of the game, 2 more over here in the city space that are available for recruitment later on, and 2 mythic energy. Mythic energy allows you to take some really cool abilities on your turn, such as modify the dice that you may need to roll, keep additional library cards, summon some gates, some barriers that will protect you from the flooding temporarily, or even unflood some of the tiles that have been submerged by the ocean. So there's lots of powerful things you can do with mythic energy. Now, as I mentioned before, resources are kept separate. I can't give something that I have to another player, but we can work together to pool our resources and be able to craft some of the amazing blueprints that this game has available. A couple things to mention, just as some general components so that you understand how the game flows, and then we'll really get into some zoom-in shots and some nifty elements that the game brings to it. In every game, you're going to be working to build 9 blueprints. The great thing about this game for Atlantis Rising 2nd Edition is that there are, as you can see, a massive amount of extra blueprints. None of these would be in this particular game of Atlantis Rising, so you can trust that there's always going to be some variety in this element when you play. Similarly, there's going to be 2 decks that you build in the game for every game of Atlantis Rising. There's a library deck that's going to have these really powerful card abilities that you will collect. You have a hand size of 4, but you can keep those cards and play them on your turn to give benefits to yourself or your teammates. Again, it's a cooperative game, so strategic teamwork is going to be the key to winning. There's this smaller deck of artifact cards. And just like the blueprints, every game you're going to pick 4 of these and shuffle them into the library deck and set the rest aside. So every game, you're going to have a very different library deck based on those really powerful artifacts that are mixed in here. That adds a lot of replayability. The last thing is the Misfortune deck. The Misfortune deck has a set of cards that are each of the 6 peninsulas of the island, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, as well as a lot of events and some even no-event cards in here, which are wonderful. Also, then you have a small deck of cards that are called Controlled Floods. These are the really bad cards that kind of put the super timer on the game. These are mean. We don't like those. But you have to put some in. The nice thing about Atlantis Rising 2nd Edition is that you can control the difficulty of the game by how many of these cards you add into the deck. There's a variable count that walks you through that in the rulebook of how many of these you can add into the deck to make the game more or less challenging. But for an intro game, the rulebook recommends that we add 3 of these into the Misfortune deck. Basically, the way that turns will work, there's no set turn rules. Everybody will work to place their workers on the board. Everybody, again, starts with 3 of those. And you'll place them out there, and then what we'll do is we'll go around, and every player will have to take a Misfortune card and reveal that, and let the bad things happen as they will on the board. And once that's done, then any workers who are not knocked off of flooded tiles will be able to take those actions and begin to gain resources. So with all of that laid out in a very light way, let's go ahead and get a closer look at the island of Atlantis and talk a little bit about the actions that you'll be taking with your workers. Here we have the beautiful island of Atlantis in all of its splendor. You'll notice that it's made up of a main city area as well as 6 of these small peninsulas that are joined together. Each of these peninsulas have a unique feel or function that they will bring to the game of Atlantis Rising. The 3 on the left here are called the Wilds, and they're the primary place that you will be sending your workers to gather resources. On any of these spaces, you'll notice that there are a number of worker placement spaces. These little discs here, they're probably easier to see on this piece here, but there's 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, and 1. So each of the various areas are broken down in that way, but whenever you place a worker in a space, typical worker placement rules, 1 can go per disc. So for instance, the end of the peninsula, only 1 worker can ever go there, with there being more spaces as you get closer to the main city location. On each of these spaces, when you go to one of the 3 areas in the wilds, you will roll a die for your worker that's in that space, and you will see if you get a result that is equal to or higher than the roll shown. So in this case, I rolled a 2. I needed a 4 or more, so I would not get that required resource. Each of the wilds have different requirements for the various resource that you're collecting, but you'll always gather one of that resource based on each worker that you have in each spot. So for this instance here, I would get to try 3 times to gather crystals. There's also gold and ore. The other 3 sections of the island are useful for either converting your ore or gaining other resources. So for instance, the forge here allows you to take the ore that you've gathered and turn it into Atlantium, which is one of the other resources that you'll need to build parts of your dimensional portal. Here we have the city section. The city section is where you'll work to get additional workers. So again, you start the game with your leader and 2 small workers. When you go to a space here on the board, you will roll 2 die, both of the yellow dice, and you will be attempting to get the number that is shown on the thing, on the chart, the section of the island that you're at. So for instance, here I would be rolling 2 die, adding the number that the Wrath of the Gods track is at, which we'll talk about that in just a moment, and we're trying to get a number that's 9 or higher. If we do so, we will get an additional worker for future rounds that we'll be able to place and utilize. Each player, just as a reminder, will have 2 of those workers that they're able to recruit throughout the game. And you'll notice again that the number you're trying to get is lower the farther down the island you go, going 7, 8, 8, 9, 9, 9. Each of the island's best actions are located at their tip, which of course are the areas that are most likely to flood first. So your actions get more difficult as the game will progress. Again, we mentioned the forge. Finally, we have the library. The library is where you'll go to collect cards from the library, those powerful actions and even artifacts that can be found there. Starting at the end of the island and working in, you would draw 2 cards and keep 2, draw 2 cards and keep 1, and put the other on the bottom of the draw pile. Or with the last 3 sections, you would actually be discarding that second action. The last place that you can send workers that is an unlimited space is the actual middle of Atlantis. And for every worker that you send there, you'll get 1 mystic energy that you're able to spend to do some of the most amazing actions in the game. All right, here we have the main blueprint section for the dimensional portal that we're trying to build. In here, you'll notice there's these large blue circles and one for 5 or more players, but we'll pretend this doesn't exist for now. In these locations, if you place workers here, any number of workers can go to the same location here, which means at maximum you could build 2 blueprints per turn if your team was really synergized and on it. Each of these blueprint items have a list of required resources on them. So for instance, if we wanted to build this bulwark here, we'll see that it's 2 gold and 1 Atlantium to build. Now, that's a tall order potentially for one player to do, which thankfully, in this instance, if multiple players go to the same space, they can share the resource cost. So for instance here, say that blue player had the gold but didn't have Atlantium, but thankfully green did. They can both place workers here and collectively contribute those resources to build this particular blueprint. Upon doing so, you gain whatever benefit is listed on that particular blueprint. So for instance, the bulwark lets us unflood 1 flooded tile. So we could again slow the game's timer down by completing that particular need. Now, for instance here, if we built this astral watchtower, this is a really interesting spot because it allows us to actually have an additional worker placement location. It says move this Atlantean to any wild peninsula action space, even one already occupied. So for instance, in future rounds, if we had placed a worker here, we would be able to teleport them to any place on the board after we have seen what's flooded. So it allows you to hedge your bets a little bit. There's several places like this that are going to be worker placement spots and many that give you a particular bonus right away. Now, let's pretend that all of these are built. All 9 of these have flipped over, and we are ready to build the astral portal. Our team has worked together really well. Everything is flipped, and we are ready to go. There's one last component that has to be built last, and that is the power core. There's a few particular rules for the power core. Now, you'll notice the power core requires 2 of the crystals, 2 gold, 2 Atlantium, which is basically refined ore, and 2 mystic energy. That's a tall order. But to do this, everyone has to have their leader token here. So everybody has to contribute. Everybody has to be involved in this. So this is a tall order. Everybody has to get their leader to this space and be able to contribute resources to build this power core. And assuming that it is built, you'll flip this over, and your dimensional portal is complete, and you have won the game. The last other board that we need to talk about is the Wrath of the Gods track and the Atlantean supply board. This is where all of your additional workers that you'll be gaining from the city throughout the board are housed. Every player puts 2 of them here at the start of the game. As you complete city actions, you may be able to get 1 of them per action to your board and be able to use. And of course, once you have your 2 workers from the supply, you can't get any more, so it's probably best to let other people take a chance at getting their workers as well. The other thing you'll note here is what's called Atlantean volunteers. Certain blueprint cards or other abilities, library cards, things like that, may allow you to gain temporary workers called Atlantean volunteers. I think they look like ghosts, but that's just me. But you can get little volunteers that will come to your board and are temporary workers. If you're familiar with worker placement games, they follow this pretty standard rules. They're your worker, you place them, you can use them however you want for that turn, and then they'll come back to the supply to be recruited in later turns. The other thing here is we have the Wrath of the Gods track that does play into how effective you are at recruiting volunteers. Basically, at the end of every player's turn, rounds are broken into 4 big chunks, I guess you could say. First, you place your workers, your Atlanteans, out on the board. Then you do your misfortune cards, which are going to tell you mainly what's getting flooded and what's happening, the bad stuff. Then you'll take your actions. All your workers, you'll pull them up. You'll do your actions, try to collect resources, build blueprints, all of those things. From there, you have to endure the Wrath of the Gods. And what that means is you're going to look at this number. So the first round is a 0, which is great. And you have to then, as a group, collectively decide a number of tiles to flood equal to this number. So for the first turn, it's great, 0. That's what we want. But after that, once you've endured the Wrath of the Gods, you have to slide this tracker over 1. So every round, this tracker is going to slide until it hits 3, and then it's just going to stay there. But effectively now, at 3, every turn at the end of the round, we have to, as a team, decide to flip and flood 3 tiles on the board, which is a lot. Remember, there's 6 peninsulas, 6 tiles each. That's a lot that's getting flooded really quickly. And so we have to move quickly as a team to make sure that we're building those blueprints quickly and effectively to get out of here, because it is going to be underwater really soon. The other thing to mention with this number is that this is what I referenced before with being tied to your city recruitment. When you roll those 2 dice, you're going to take their value and you're going to add whatever number the tile marker is on, and that is your chance of success for recruiting someone. Because of course, as things get more dire, people take notice and begin to want to help out and get out of here because they realize, oh no, this isn't just a light drizzle. We have some problems. We need to go. So that is the Wrath of the Gods track and your recruitment. And that, in a nutshell, is how you play Atlantis Rising. I hope you enjoyed getting a look at some of the awesome components and the way that the game plays, but maybe you're curious how I felt about it as well. Well, I'm glad you guys are always so considerate and ask me. I really enjoyed Atlantis Rising. That's the short version. You can leave now. Normally, if you've seen my other reviews, you'll know that I don't actually review a ton of co-op games. It's not usually my first pick. It's not that I don't like them, but usually I love a more competitive game. It's just the way I am. So I was walking into this review a little hesitant because I was like, I don't know how I feel about it. Thankfully, Atlantis Rising quickly won me over. With its quality components, really replayable gameplay, good asymmetric character abilities, and the push of teamwork and viable player count, the variable amount of people that could sit down at the table to do this game, experience this game, I was quickly won over. This will fall into one of the few co-op games that I actually really enjoy, right up there with Spirit Island and some of the other heavy hitters in the co-op title section, Pandemic Legacy, things like that. Atlantis Rising has a lot of positive points. From beautiful components, as I mentioned before, the resources that I was playing with for this game were just the basic retail edition resources. And they look great, they're wonderful, but there is actually the deluxe version of those resources out there, which is just incredible to me. Elf Creek does a wonderful job always making top-notch component quality and having these really immersive art style and feel of their games, and I feel like Atlantis Rising follows in those footsteps really well. I thoroughly enjoyed just the feel of this game, and every moment that I was playing, I felt like I was really immersed in this Atlantean world, trying to get these resources and save my people. It's a really fun, compelling narrative, and the gameplay is solid. It's easy to teach. This is not a complicated game. Again, with co-ops, always one of the perks of a co-op game, right, is that it's easy to teach a new gamer, or maybe someone who's not as hardcore of a gamer, because you can help them. And there's no bias, there's no impetus for any concern there, because you're all on the same team, and that's great. This game is really easy. Put a dude out, try to get resources, help each other build some components. Really simple stuff, but really fun and engaging. It's a nice co-op game. To the mention of team, gold star for the fact that you can play 1 to 7 players in the same game. That's such a challenge, because a lot of times when you get into that 6 or 7 player range, you really start to fall off on the number of hardcore games you can play that aren't going to take 72 hours. Cough, cough, Twilight Imperium, cough, cough, Game of Thrones, right? When you get into those higher counts, you just either lose time or you lose depth. It's one or the other. The great thing about Atlantis Rising is you don't really have to give up much of either, because as the number of players grows, so does the amount of misfortune cards, so the amount of rounds that you're playing usually diminishes. So you're not getting a ton more time commitment regardless of how many people are at the table, because everybody can kind of put their people out at the same time and definitely resolve their people at the same time. So it makes things go pretty quick regardless of the player count. That's really nice and rare. So that huge gold star and a half, for that. That was great. I really enjoyed that experience. So overall, a really solid game with a lot of positive points. You've got all of these artifacts, and these are just a few that I pulled out of the box again here for this piece, but there's way more than the 9 that you'll use in any game. And so every game you can count that there's going to be a variety in the pieces of the machine that you're building, which will keep things fresh as you try to prioritize different abilities and powers in different orders depending on what's available. Similarly, in the library deck, you noticed I only pulled out 4 of the available plethora of those artifact cards that get shuffled in. That's going to mean that the artifacts in any given game are different at the library, and so that's always going to keep things fresh. Obviously, you have a lot of player characters that you can play as, and so that's going to give you just layers of asymmetry and replayability in this game, which means that Atlantis Rising won't be getting stale at your table anytime soon. In terms of negative critiques, there's not much to say. I will mention that while a few of these peninsulas look similar, minus their iconography, I've had a bit of a struggle assembling this map, a little more than you'd think I should probably, trying to find all the 6 pieces that go together and putting them in the right slot. That's probably just me, but that was a tedious moment where I was taking more time building the peninsulas of Atlantis than I wanted to. And so that's just a small note from Tyler. Maybe that's just me being goofy. The only other thing that's worth mentioning, just as a note as you consider if this game is for your group, is that like a lot of co-op games, this is a game that is susceptible to quarterbacking. That phrase, maybe you've experienced it specifically in a co-op game, that phrase basically means you're all working as a team, but you have one player who, well-intentioned as it may be, starts kind of helping you make your turn decisions for you. Say, well, if you go here and you do this thing, then I can do this, and if you do that, then I'll get it. And so very quickly it becomes a solo game that a lot of people are sitting around a table just experiencing, well, one person has to do all the shot calling. And maybe that's fun, maybe that works for your group. That's just something that this game could happen that might be a detractor depending on how your group functions. That's not a negative statement directly about Atlantis Rising, just something to keep in the back of your mind as you contemplate if this is a game that you want to add to your collection. So with all of those positives and statements made, I would give Atlantis Rising a 7 out of 10 in the co-op category. It's beautiful, it's fun, it's engaging, it has intentional elements that add asymmetry and replayability to this game, and it is just fun. It's nice, it's easy to teach to various skilled groups, like because it is co-op, because it is relatively simple as far as the iconography. Someone who's maybe not as hardcore of a gamer can still come and enjoy and appreciate this experience. It's great because, again, 1 to 7 players is a masterpiece in the board game world, and so that's a huge plus. Lots of strong benefits here. It is worth mentioning that there's also an expansion that'll be delivering soon that adds monsters like Medusa and harpies and things from the gods to harass you, that will add additional elements of replayability and difficulty and challenge to this game. And so just in the base game, I think there's a lot to unpack, but with the knowledge that there's additional content out there, I think this is a game that you'll be able to trust that you'll get a lot of replayability and a lot of quality content from. So if you are looking for a cooperative game that has a really nice swath of, can I play it solo? Absolutely. Can I play it with all of my friends? Absolutely. This is a great game that's going to add a lot of value to your shelf and your collection. So I would encourage you to check it out. Elf Creek Games has a lot of great hits. I think really highly of their pieces, and this is definitely a great game that I'll enjoy getting to the table again and again. Thank you for coming to Meeple Mountain for all of your board game related needs. I hope you enjoyed this video and this review and a little bit of a tutorial on how the game functions. I hope it helps inform your decision on if this is a game that you want to add into your personal collection. I hope you'll keep coming back as we always are trying to pump out new content, so continue to follow us and check in on the reviews and work that our team is doing. And as always, happy gaming. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out some of our other Meeple Mountain content. I promise you won't be disappointed. This is Tyler Williams, signing off.